Liszt wrote several sets of etudes, and the one characteristic that they all have in common is that they are all musical poems. They are never exercises, even in one or two technical tricks, although you have to have a complete and comprehensive technique to play all of Liszt's etudes well. As close as he came to writing more straightforward studies, if you like, would be maybe the ones based on etudes by caprices by Paganini. But even there, they must not be played in any other way than as poems. One of the pieces where you find a lot of delinquency going on, as we all know, is La Campanella, which almost everybody plays far too fast and far too loud, and forgetting that it's a complete recreation by Liszt of, in this case, not a caprice, but the finale of the second violin concerto, as a little poem about a little bell. And the little bell, the little, is important because it's quiet. And marvelously in that piece, Liszt doesn't write fortissimo until the last line, and he doesn't write, or in the last page, and he doesn't write forte anywhere in the whole piece. But we're going to talk now about the Trois Etudes de Concert, which are three of the most popular of Liszt's etudes. They explore completely different things, and they're very well known under a bunch of titles, and we're not even sure whether Liszt wrote them. They were announced by an editor in Liszt's lifetime, but the first edition that actually has the titles, Il Lamento, La Leggerezza, and Un Sospiro, didn't come out until after Liszt's death. But in any case, these titles are not too bad as titles go. And Liszt worked very hard at these, and the edition that's in general circulation uses as its principal source the first edition, in which there are a few errors, some of which you can work out by musical logical thought, and others of which we were happily able to get right because the manuscript turned up relatively recently and is in a library in France, not far from Paris, in Royaumont. And the manuscript of all three is written in a single book, so it's quite clear that they belong together. And there's one trial manuscript in Weimar for Il Lamento, but that's clearly a draft. But this book, which is a bound book full, and Liszt has covered 50-odd pages of music in it. And they make a very good change if you've only played the Transcendental Etudes, not to say anything disparaging about them. The first of these studies has a call to attention at the beginning and a little flourish, but after that relaxes into one of Liszt's loveliest melodies. It starts from... so on until you get to... Liszt very often does this, putting a tune with the left thumb, an accompaniment, and lets the right hand rest. And it's a good study. If you ever play pieces that are for the left hand by itself, you'll see how beautiful the left hand is for... How marvelously it is adapted to let your thumb act as a singer and the rest of your hand act as an accompanist. And so Liszt comes and goes on this in this piece, as he does. There's a famous passage of a similar nature in Valet d'Obermann, for example. Textually, this one isn't too much of a problem. There's trying to find the exact point. There's one note, yes, I found it, where many editions have a C natural when it should jolly well be a C sharp, which is... And you frequently see, which is a plain straight error. There is no need actually to have a sharp on it because we're in 5 sharps, but some editions put a natural sign, and in this edition I've taken the liberty of reinforcing it by adding the sharp sign, which isn't strictly necessary but is precautionary. That's the only controversial note in the piece. It's a piece you have to gauge the build-up with some care, because it gets louder and louder and louder and louder, and all of a sudden you can't get any louder and you've gone too far. And that very tune that I was just playing is part of the build-up from here. And a couple of pages later, you've got just for this very chord. This is a little piece of advice that I frequently give, which I think works in virtually all cases. If you have an arpeggiated chord in the left hand and a simple chord in the right hand, play the chord in the right hand together with the bottom note of the arpeggio, so that you don't mix this have some of this ringing in the air over the top of the chord. It very often happens that if you arpeggiate before the beat, you end up mixing 2 harmonies together that you would really rather not. I suppose the only other controversial thing about this study is the crescendo in the second last bar. It's clearly in the manuscript. It's not in some editions, but many editions end this study quietly, but I think that's not what it does. And they print the arpeggio in semiquavers instead of demi-semiquavers, so it must be somewhat dramatic. Liszt writes calmato before this, so... And it ends. Which is not an uncharacteristic thing to do, and it's not, as some people would have it, pretty as that might be. The second etude is somewhat the province of the delinquent, and is very frequently played too fast, and where the technical stuff gets in the way of the melody and you don't get the articulation right. But another one of Liszt's famous tempo marks, which doesn't come right out and say allegretto, it says quasi allegretto, which you better take to mean not as fast as allegretto. And so... you can take your time, so that when you've got the elaborated version of that, where you just play quietly and you want people to imagine that this lovely melody is somehow still there when you're playing. You would like to recall both things simultaneously. There's a famous passage here where Liszt writes two possibilities for the right hand, one which has got, and the other one which has, and virtually everybody plays this ossia, which he's marked ossia più difficile, and I think you can take it that's probably what he would have played himself if he ever played this piece in public, which we do not know. We do know that he played the last one, the third one, Un Sospiro, in public, but we don't actually have any evidence at all to suggest that he ever played this one. The end of this piece should not be messed about with. It was the fashion earlier in the 20th century not to be happy with the quiet ending that Liszt put on the work, and so they play a fancy little flourish, and there's a published one by Theodore Leschetizky, which is a curiosity, but please look at it and then discard it. So just keep it quiet and simple. Which is a perfectly fine ending as it is. The third one of these has always been very popular, and it's a marvelous exercise in controlling pedal and getting sounds from two hands, playing with the weight in different places. And it's enormous fun to play, apart from anything else, once you get on top of the basic thing of crossing your hands all the time. The second statement of this tune produces an error which is so common, you wonder whether anyone's ever looked at the score properly ever, or if they've just listened to somebody's recording of it. When the tune comes the next time, it's in triplets, and it goes... So if it were in 12/8, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. Once they put that together with instead of producing that rhythm, you so often hear which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it really will not do. The triplets are absolutely necessary. The middle section has a famous wrong note in most editions, which is A sharp on the bottom there, because it's missing in the first edition, but in the manuscript it's perfectly clear. It's and then at the end of the following cadenza, this note here is a G natural, but it is very often printed and you've gone, if you look at the harmony right, that from here with the cadenza, it's all the same harmony, and then so apart from that it is clearly a G natural in the manuscript, it is indubitably the right harmony. And it's a G natural just because of this progression, because as we all know, it's really an F double sharp, as it is there, and as it is. But for the voice leading here, an F sharp would be out of the question. So, an F double sharp. It has to be an G. The very interesting feature of this study is just before the last appearance of the tune. And it then Liszt leaves a sort of gap. There's a pause. It doesn't say cadenza, but we know he played one, and we are very fortunate that for 5 different people on 5 different occasions, he wrote down little connecting passages which at their shortest are 4 bars long, and at their longest are 5.5. So you have the possibility of or and some that are harmonically more straightforward. The simplest one. And one only slightly more elaborate. And they're all worth a shot. My personal favorite is this one. Because of the way it dwells on the B double flat before you go back to the D flat major. Similarly, at the end of the piece, Liszt also wrote an alternative coda. The coda, as in the original edition and in the manuscript, goes which he extended into a marvelous little whole tone scale. And I would suggest that one's worth having a good look at as well. All of these extra bits date from the late 1870s, early 1880s, so they are some distance removed from the time that the original study was written, and of course we must look upon them as optional rather than compulsory, but they're rather nice. And that's really all I have to say by way of an introduction to the Trois Etudes de Concert.